Well, good morning. As Mark said, each week we have more and more people able to be back with us, and we're grateful for each and every one of you. And for those who it's your first time or just you've only recently been back since I was away last week, it's good to see you again, and I'm so grateful for the progress that is being made. And again, we do welcome those who are joining us from home. We are in the middle and really kind of winding down a series of lessons in which we're trying to compare and contrast sort of the secular modern worldview versus the biblical and Christian worldview. And we're raising the question in that series, why believe? Why should we believe that the Bible is true, that it's God's word, that God is real, that he cares for us? And in this series, we first did 3 lessons in which we tried to give evidence for why it's valid for us to believe that God is and that the scriptures are his word, that they are a reliable and trustworthy source for us to gain true knowledge. And then we've pivoted toward looking at a series of lessons in which we have shown that Christianity is really superior. It's just better than the modern worldview in terms of some of the things that the human heart desperately longs for. We need meaning in order to live in this world. And we have to have some sense of identity, who we are, and we best understand who we are when we know whose we are. We need a freedom, and actually a freedom that's contrary to what people often think freedom is. We need a freedom from our desires that have a tendency to bring us into bondage, to enslave us. We've talked about all of that, and next week we'll talk about hope, that Christianity gives us a hope that endures forever, and that the secular world has nothing to offer that can even come close in comparison with that. And then today we're going to talk about satisfaction. That Scripture and Christianity and Christ himself give us satisfaction that won't leave you feeling empty after you have attained it. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. And as we prepare to discuss that, I want to suggest that there are probably 2 kinds of people in this room. Somebody said, yeah, there's 2 kinds of people in the world, those who divide the world into 2 kinds of people and those who don't. That's true enough, and I suppose there's a lot of ways in which we can kind of divide people up. But one of the divisions I think that we could say rightly characterizes just all of us who are gathered here this morning is that you either believe that it exists or you do not believe that it exists. And I suppose before I could ask you for a show of hands, which side of that you fall on, you're going to have to say, well, you're going to have to define for me, Lawrence, what it is. I don't know if I believe that it's real or it's simply an illusion. I can't answer that until I know what it is. So do you want to know what it is? I hope you do, because here's what it is. And I'm going to be using the word it a lot to refer to this as a shorthand for that sense of well-being that we might describe as an enduring blissful state of satisfaction, contentment, and happiness. Blaise Pascal said that every person, without exception in the human race and the history of all humanity, longs to live in that sort of a state of consciousness, to be at peace, to feel satisfaction, to be what we use in common parlance today, to be happy. And in fact, I think that that's what most people in life are aspiring for. It's what they're working for. It's what they're striving for. People want to be happy. And it seems that there's something wired within us to strive in that direction, to want to at last come to this enduringly blissful state of being. And so I think all of us long for that, but that's not the question. Do you long for it? The question is, do you believe that this state of being is real, that it's attainable, that it actually exists? Or are you more of the mindset that, no, that's just kind of an illusion? That's an ideal that would be nice if it could be attained, but it actually is not something that contains true, enduring satisfaction, contentment, peace, well-being. That's something that we're never really going to ever experience fully. But there are some, perhaps, even among this audience, who would say, yes, it does exist. And I've found that typically that's characteristic of those who are younger. Young people say, yeah, it's out there. I know that it's attainable. And if you're in that number that says, yes, it exists, that can be found, then I also know this about you, that you probably haven't found it yet. You believe that it exists, and it's just over the next mountaintop, or just around the next bend, or to use another image that I'd like to use repeatedly through this lesson, it's behind a door. There's a locked door that says "it" on the face of the door. And behind that door is enduring, blissful satisfaction, contentment, and the happiness that I long for. And in order to get into the room where that "it" exists, I've got to find the key to the door. And the key to that door is probably located in either a what or a who. A what being a possession, an item, a car, a house, clothing. If I could just get it or get enough money to be able to get it, then I will have this blissful, happy state of being. And some people think that because each time they make a purchase of something that they've wanted for some period of time, their immediate reaction to that is a feeling of satisfaction, of contentment, of happiness and joy over what I've gotten. It tends to begin to fade rather quickly, but maybe you think that if you could just get to the place where you had enough of those things, that would be the key that would permanently unlock the door and you could abide in this permanent state of happiness and satisfaction. For others, it's not a what so much as it is a who. If I could just meet the right person, the right man, the right woman, and finally get married, and then, if I've done that and it wasn't found there, I thought it was, but it wasn't there, but probably with the having of children, bringing children into our life and getting a house so we can have a home and we can settle down, and then maybe a couple of children and a dog. And if we can just have enough who's around us that we enjoy, then at last we're going to have found it and we'll be happy and satisfied and in this permanent state of bliss. For others, it's located in an achievement. It's about making the grade to get into that school that you've had your heart set on all your life, or into that graduate program, or having gone through that, now it is in getting that dream job. If I could just land that dream job at that firm that I've always had my eye on, and the salary and the perks that come with that, or maybe it's really the status that would come from that. That I could distinguish myself so much by what I'm competent to do, that everyone in my field and all the people I respect would look at me and say, he's the world's leading person. And if I could get to that state of being, then I know I'd be happy. I'd be satisfied. It'd be enough, and I would have that permanent and abiding sense of well-being. Others think of it as an experience. Maybe you like to travel, and you think back, I think the happiest I ever was that time we went to Hawaii, or the time that we went to Europe, or, when I walked down the streets of Paris. It was just, in that moment, everything was right with the world. And I think if I could just get to a point where I could travel all the time, then I would have an enduring, blissful, satisfied, happy state that would just go on and on and on. Or maybe it's not a place, it's simply if I could move to a city or reach a state of life where I'm retired now. We're gonna work till we're 65, 67, somewhere in there, and then we're gonna retire. And when we retire, then everything's gonna be okay, and I'll be happy because I don't have to get up and go through the daily grind anymore. Well, young Solomon, who wrote, most people think, the book of Ecclesiastes, was a person who was a believer in it. And he thought that he could apply himself to the pursuit of finding the keys that would unlock the door labeled "it" for him. and that he would find the meaning and the satisfaction, the happiness that his heart, just like your heart, longs for. And so he set out in his young life and with his really remarkable mind and intellect and work ethic to try to find all the keys that would open all the doors to all the it's that one could ever hope for. In fact, this is the way that Solomon puts it in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, beginning in verse 4. He says, I undertook great projects. So for him, at least at one point in his life, it was doing, astonishing achievements. And he was one of those kinds of people that, it's like some of the elite that we see today, the Elon Musks, who I listened to a podcast the other day, him talking about wanting to help humanity become not an intergalactic, but interterrestrial species, I think was the terminology that he uses. And he's got his mindset that we're going to colonize Mars. We're going to be a people who live on multiple planets in our solar system. And so Solomon, obviously not living in a time as technologically advanced as we are, couldn't quite set his goals that far, but he did undertake in his time the greatest projects, apparently, that just about anybody had ever undertaken. And so he built houses for himself, and he planted vineyards, and I made gardens. And the word gardens there is kind of interesting because it's the same word that's used for the Garden of Eden. He's trying to restore in this world a place of beauty and of peace and tranquility, because surely it could be found if we could just rebuild what was lost in the fall. And so he made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. And I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. So you see, he's into the technology end of this, of building systems that could make this garden flourish. But he goes on, it's not just that. He says, I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. And so he had people at his beck and call, servants who could do his bidding. And he wouldn't have to bother himself with the menial tasks of life. He could devote his full attention and energies to the things that, where it is found. Not in the drudgery of day-to-day chores, but in the sweet spot. Being there all the time, doing the things that brought him joy and pleasure. And so he owned a mass amount of flocks as well and herds as a standard or measure of wealth, more than anyone in Jerusalem before him. And he amassed silver and gold for himself. He says, the treasure of kings. Think about that. You like to collect stuff? My in-laws were big collectors. They like to go. There's a place east of Dallas where they used to go on, I think it was like second Thursdays or something of the month, and it was like the world's largest flea market. It just unbelievable. It's just out in the middle of nowhere, and just acres and acres and acres of people, selling their, what I kind of thought of as their junk, but they saw it as the treasures of kings, things that had been accumulated from all different places and brought there, and they could go through that and buy stuff. Well, Solomon was able to do that on the highest level, and he was able to learn of the treasures, the artifacts, the artwork that was the crown jewel of other kingdoms, and he had so much wealth that he was able to purchase and have those things brought to him for him to enjoy. And he says, I acquired male and female singers. You like music? It's one of the things that makes me feel happy in the moment. I love music. I just enjoy listening to music. And fortunately, we have a time in which we can pretty much listen to whatever we want to, pretty affordably. But in Solomon's day, that wasn't an easy thing to do. But if he heard a sound he liked, if there was a vibe that he heard, somewhere on the streets of Jerusalem that he liked, he didn't, have the luxury of getting a recording, so he just bought the band. He just, okay, you guys come live in the palace, and you play that music, and I'll enjoy that. So he had male and female singers, and, guys, he had a harem as well. And then he adds the delights of a man's heart. No need to comment there, but isn't it true that this is something that people, even today, still think that's where the lasting satisfaction is to be found? He goes on, he says, I became greater by far. And I've highlighted that because it's not really so much important what comes next or what's connected with that, because it seems to me that that's one of the things that people so often think of where it is found. It is just found in being the greatest, being the GOAT. Solomon says, I was the GOAT, the greatest of all time. No one in the past or the present exceeded the glory, the wisdom, the wealth that I had attained in Jerusalem before me. And all the while, he says, my wisdom remained with me. And so it says, I denied myself nothing that my eyes desired. If I saw it and wanted it, I got it. And he says, I refused my heart no pleasure. If I felt a craving for it, I acquired it. I gave myself to it. And my heart took delight in all my labor. I enjoyed the work that I was doing. And this was the reward for all my toil. So in other words, Solomon found the key or the keys that would unlock every door that potentially had the word "it" written on it. He found every key to unlock every one of those doors under the sun. And under the sun is a phrase that Solomon uses repeatedly in this book to describe him pursuing this blissful state of happiness by the pursuit of things that existed in time and space in this world. Under the sun is the phrase that he uses. And so he thoroughly gave himself to it. And so if you're a yes person, I believe it exists. And you see that Solomon found the key to every it door in the world, you're probably on the edge of your seat thinking, well, which door was it found in? Did he find it? And how does he describe it? And we'll come back to that in a moment. I'll just leave you sitting on ice there with that for a while, and we'll come back to Solomon there. But first, let me share with you what I've observed, and probably you've observed too, about other people's quest for it. Because it's not just Solomon who's on a happiness quest. You are on a happiness quest. I'm on a happiness quest. As Pascal said, we're all on a happiness quest. But here are some things that I've noticed, and you probably have as well, about people on that happiness quest. There's, again, two kinds of people here. There are those who haven't found the key, and yet they still believe that it is behind one of these doors. They just can't get in. In fact, I think many of the people who haven't found it yet, who haven't been able to self-actualize, who haven't been able to reach their dreams, often still believe that it's there. It's just that I haven't been able to get the key to open the door. But I know it's right on the other side of the door, just around the next bend. And if that's who you are and you've gone on long enough, you may be characterized by one of two things. Again, this is just my observation, but one of them is that people in that state tend to become resentful eventually. They're resentful because they believe the reason that they haven't been able to find the keys to open the door to their it is because other people are preventing them from letting it happen. Sometimes it's a particular person who's the object of that resentment. Maybe it was your mom, just the things, the way she raised me, the things she said to me, or my dad, what he did, that's just kind of ruined everything and made it so difficult for me to be able to ever achieve that state of satisfaction and happiness in life. And so they become the object of our resentment. Or maybe it was, your Uncle Rico and Napoleon Dynamite, and it's just your high school football coach. He is, the bane of your existence, and the reason that you're not Tom Brady is because he wouldn't put you in the game when you were in high school. Or maybe it's not so much an individual person who's the object of your resentment, but it's just the system, man. It's just everything works against me. It's sort of in an unfair way. It's just against me, and there's no way I can ever get the keys to open it and experience my bliss and joy and permanent state of happiness because everything is stacked against me, and we become resentful. Others take a little bit different track. They say, well, I'm not going to blame anybody else. I was unable to achieve it in spite of my efforts to do so. It still exists. I just don't have what it takes to get there. It's on a mountaintop, and that mountain is just so high and it's in such rarefied air. I just grow exhausted trying to finally climb to the place where I can at last experience it. Or the keys are just so hard to find. No matter how hard I search, I can't find the key to the door. I don't have what it takes. And so we become filled with self-loathing. And we say, I'm just a failure. It's there, and other people have attained it, but not me, because I am a failure. So we resent others, we loathe ourselves, is often the result of those who don't find the key. But then there are those who do find the key to the door, and they achieve their dreams. All the things when they were young that they said, well, that's where the happiness lies, that's where it is, and you did what it took, and you had the ability, the drive to get there, and you found the key, and you opened the door labeled it, and you walked in. If that's you, and some of you that is you, you've experienced two things that you could stand up here and tell us about. Number one, you experienced that it didn't last long enough. That you got into that school, you got that job, or you got that spouse, or you got that house, or you attained that level of respectability among your corporate structure, whatever it was for you, you got there, and at first, man, it did feel great. I'm on top of the world. I'm finally there. But as almost as quickly as it arrived, it began to go away. It didn't last. And what you thought was a state of happiness that would just endure forever is just sort of fading away. It's like study after study that's been done on people who win the lottery. Their happiness, as they describe it, just goes off the chart for a few days or weeks or months, and then after a period of a year or so, it goes back down to exactly where it was before, and sometimes below where it was before. Strange, isn't it? And then maybe you also notice that even at its peak, even when it was at its very best early on, it still wasn't quite what you thought it would be. It's good. I mean, it's better than not, for sure, but it just wasn't quite as sweet as I thought it was going to be. So the two problems that those who achieve and get through the door labeled it and experience it is that it doesn't last long and it's not strong enough. There's a playwright by the name of Henrik Ibsen who in the late 1800s called it the life lie. He said that the belief that some object or condition will bring you the satisfaction you are longing for is the life lie, or the life illusion. And then he adds this statement: nothing destroys a life illusion, the belief that it exists, like actually achieving your dreams. Nothing will deflate your balloon like actually achieving everything that you set out to achieve. You get there, you made it, you achieved all the things that you were striving for, and then you begin to experience it's not long lasting and it's not strong enough. And then interestingly, that's exactly what Solomon's conclusion was. After all those things that we read about him doing and being able to achieve, finding all those keys to all those doors labeled it and walking into them, here's what he says about it in that same chapter, back chapter 2, verse 11. He says, yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, all this work that I had accomplished and toiled to achieve, everything, he says, was vanity. A chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. That's pretty telling. And I've highlighted the word vanity and wind and gained there because he just felt like, you know, I did all this and I thought I was getting so much, but as I look back on it now, it's like I was really getting nowhere, at least in terms of experiencing it. It was a vanity. It was like grasping for the wind. It was elusive. In fact, the word vanity is used I don't know, 20, 30, 40 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's an important word to the book. And he literally says, the word literally means breath or vapor. Like you go out on a cold winter morning and you breathe, you exhale, and the vapor comes out and it's there for a moment and then it goes away. He says that's what that feeling of it was like. It was just so fleeting. And that's what it means. That's the metaphorical meaning of this breath. And it's translated by various men this way. It's shallow. It's not as strong as I thought it would be. It's fleeting. It doesn't last. It's passing. It's superficial. And some even translate it, it's just kind of absurd. Well, maybe you don't take to my experience of what I've observed in others and in myself about this, or maybe even Solomon you don't accept as sort of a final authority, and that's fine. So I thought of, well, who would perhaps in today's modern culture represent the Solomon of achievement in our day and time and success, and what does he say about it that might be someone you would listen to? And so I thought of Tom Brady. What's better than Tom Brady? And this is several years ago. This was after his third Super Bowl. Which one did he just win this time? Was it like his fifth or sixth or something like that? Some crazy number. But this was after his third Super Bowl, and he had a 60 minutes interview. And in that 60 minutes interview, this was one of the things that he said. He said, "Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me?" I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. Me? I thank God. It's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. Steve Croft, the interviewer, asked him, well, what's the answer? To which Tom Brady replied, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. So there you have it. The wisdom of the ancients, the wisdom of the moderns. Those who have actually achieved it have said it didn't last as long or wasn't as strong as I thought it would be. So what are we to make of this human desire for the elusive it and our inability to grasp it? Well, the Stoic and Eastern philosophers of ages gone by, their solution was to detach from this world. That the whole world is in some sense an illusion anyway, and so don't give your heart to people or to things. Just sort of kind of become emotionally numb to the world. And that way you won't experience any extreme highs, that's the trade-off, but you also won't experience any extreme lows. And you just sort of middle your way through life. Evolutionists today, I read 2 articles written by evolutionists on this topic, on happiness. And both of them said, well, this idea of a state of complete satisfaction and happiness and peace, they say, is an illusion. It's not real. It's a trick of the brain as a part of an evolutionary process that just makes you strive to survive. And actually, for the second time in this series of lessons, I have read evolutionists say that come to the conclusion that the best thing for you to do is just ignore this reality. Just go with the trick, because it keeps you getting up in the morning, it keeps you going, you keep trying, and you just don't think about the fact that it's an illusion. That you're chasing after something that you're never going to find. But if you think about that too much, you just might stop getting out of bed in the morning. So if you've been told that the modern evolutionist way of thinking, well, these are the people who really think, and Christians are the ones who check their brains at the door, I'm asking you to do just the opposite. I'm saying, think about it, ask the question, pursue it to its final answer, and they're saying, don't think about it. Just close your mind to that. Isn't that ironic? Well, C.S. Lewis, the great Christian apologist, I think is much more on the mark as to how we can figure this out. Here's the solution that he offers. Famously, he said, creatures, such as human beings and others, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exist. And then he gives some examples. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire, and there's such a thing as sex. And then he adds, if I find in myself then a desire which no experience in this world, under the sun, no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation. See, Lewis is thinking. The most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. In other words, everywhere else we look in nature, we find where there's a longing, a desire, that there's a corresponding means of fulfilling that desire. But when it comes to this deep yearning and overwhelming desire that all men, as Pascal said, seek after, Lewis says, and yet we can't find it in this world. Lewis says, well, that must mean that there's another realm, another reality, another world where that satisfaction is to be found. That the door with it is not found under the sun in our world of experience, but it lies somewhere else. He goes on, he says, if that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings. So contrary to the Stoics and Eastern philosophies, he doesn't say just numb yourself. He says enjoy life's blessings and be thankful that the giver of every good and perfect gift has put them in your hand. So don't despise them, don't be unthankful for them. These are good earthly blessings. But on the other hand, he says, I must never mistake them or something else for something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. Folks, that's brilliant. What is food? What is sex? What is a spring day in the sunshine, smelling the flowers? They're echoes. They're echoes from another land, a land that God designed you to one day inhabit. And He's placed within you longings for that. And these lower copies or echoes are a mirage of the reality that exists and which we ought to pursue. And again, that's what Solomon says as well. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 12, he says, I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy, to enjoy yourself, to do good while you live, and that each of us should eat and drink and find satisfaction in our work, our toil, because this is God's gift. So again, don't detach yourself, don't numb yourself to the joys of this world. Enjoy that, embrace them for what they are, temporal, passing, fleeting, vain moments of enjoyment in this life. That includes the things in it, the work that you accomplish, and to some extent, in a way, even the people in your life. You see, if you love your people more than you love your God, you'll make a God out of your people and you'll crush them because they will never be able to give you and satisfy you what only God can give. And so we love and we enjoy the gifts that God has given us, but we don't ever substitute them for the God who alone can bring the ultimate satisfaction that He created us to seek in Him. In verse 11, that's where Solomon says famously that God has made everything beautiful in its time. So in this world, there's a place and a time for all of these beautiful things to experience that are fleeting. But then he adds this, that God has also set eternity in the human heart. And that's what distinguishes us from the animals who can find their complete satisfaction in this world only. But because, as Lewis said, you were made for something more, another world, God has placed this eternity in your heart, a longing for more, a longing for that which lasts and which is stronger than what the its are that can be found in this world. And so in the secular view, it is an illusion that keeps you searching for what you will never find under the sun. That's what the world can offer you, and you have the choice of embracing that. Solomon's view is that it is the ultimate reality, God himself, which lies beyond the sun. But for us, that raises perhaps the most difficult question of all. Okay, it does exist and it is in God himself, but I'm earthbound, I'm time-bound. How can I ever find God? How could I ever climb the mountain that is high enough? How could I ever build a tower that would reach into heaven? How could I ever come up with what it takes to find God? Who could ever achieve it? Well, the gospel is, and this is what sets Christianity apart from every other world religion. The gospel, the good news is that it is found in Jesus. And you don't have to ascend to heaven to bring him down, but that he descended from heaven to seek you out and give himself to you. That's grace. That's a gift. And only Jesus can offer it. In John chapter 6, which corresponds so well with what John read this morning from John chapter 4, with the woman at the well who was thirsty, and Jesus offered her a drink from himself that would satisfy her thirst forever and turn her into a well of water that would spring up to everlasting life. And so in John 6, he switches the metaphor from water to bread, that which we feed upon to sustain us and gives us temporal satisfaction and strength. And Jesus there says, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. See, you don't climb up. He comes down. He comes down from heaven so that whoever eats this bread will live forever. And the word live there is not the bios word that we get biological life from, but Zoe, eternal, spiritual, enduring life. Will live forever. And this bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. And you see what that does when you know the story of the gospel, of how Jesus came into this world to become breakable like bread is broken, so that it could be broken down and ingested, so that like bread has to be broken down and ingested in order to give us nourishment. The God who exists beyond and is unattainable by human effort comes to us and comes to us in a breakable form. And he ultimately was broken to pieces as he gave his life on the cross, dying so that he could give life to the world. When you see that, you catch a glimpse, just a glimpse of the satisfaction and the joy and the happiness that is to come, that you're the object of his love. A self-sacrificing, self-giving love so profound that there is no depths, no extreme that it won't go to in order to chase you down and to give you life. And that's the hope of the gospel. And that'll change you, and that'll give you satisfaction that begins now and will blossom in eternity. And that's what Christianity has to offer that the secular world cannot touch. If you're not a Christian this morning and you have heard enough and you say, I want in, I want to step in, I want this water, I want this bread, I want this satisfaction that nothing here can provide, then we encourage you to come and we'll study with you and talk with you about how to become a Christian. If you need the prayers of the church for whatever need, we encourage you to come while we stand.